Hello, welcome to Musicians Roundtable. I'm Jeffrey Goodman. Today we have as our guests Mason Williams, Carlos Barbosa-Lima, and Larry Del Casale. Carlos Barbosa-Lima has recently released an album of Mason Williams songs arranged for two guitars, as well as, depending on the track, percussion, clarinet, and violin. And Larry also plays the second guitar part along with him. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to discuss is classical gas, the iconic and world beloved music of Mason Williams. So, Mason, I wanted to ask you, could you give us a sense of how you originally began to compose this song, Classical Gas?
Let's see. Well, I was writing comedy for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, which was on the air from 1968 through 69. Played 74 shows, and I would take my guitar to work, and a lot of Tom and Dick's comedy spots are based on folk music, so I'd work out musical routines for them on the guitar, and I was also listening to a lot of guitar players back then. Silvio Santisteban, Baden Powell, and all kinds of jazz guitarists, and Sandy Bull. And so I was really enmeshed in guitar music. And so I decided to write a piece for guitar. And it started when I would sit down by my fireplace. I had a little guitar that I kept right beside the fireplace, and I would sit on the hearth and sort of noodle around on the guitar. And so I started working out this song, and I would take my guitar to CBS and when I'd burn out on writing a comedy piece, you'd reach a point where you just had to step back from it like it was a painting and look at it for a minute before you got back into it. I would pick up the guitar and work on Classical Gas. And I worked on it for about 2 months while I was writing on the show. So, in between comedy bits for Tom and Dick and Jack Benny and boy, you name it, Classical Gas was part of that that experience. And to, one of the things I used to do is that I would play it for Tommy Smothers, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And he used to say, Mason would come in and he would play the whole tune for me, even if he just changed a single eighth note somewhere. And so he said that I heard Classical Gas more than anybody else, probably in the very beginning, for sure, because he would ask me what I'd think of this. And Tommy was actually a very good guitar player, better than you might think. And he played with a pick, not fingerstyle. And oh, I could go back to my history of why I got involved in fingerstyle, but that was back in 1958 and 59 when I was a student at Oklahoma City University. But anyway, I fell in love with the fingerstyle guitar playing, and I never learned to play very well with a pick. It was just the open-handed way of playing was I couldn't get used to the wrist action, and anyway, so I'm glad I stuck with fingerstyle guitar. And so originally the tune was called Classical Gasoline because I thought of it as here's some fuel for the classical guitar. And the guy that copied the music for my recording for Warner Brothers just abbreviated the word gasoline to gas, and so it became Classical Gas based on what it said on the charts for the studio orchestra. And so it's always a creative process. And oh, let's see, as a composition, I had studied classical music in at Oklahoma City University, and one of the great things about it was you learned about all the compositional techniques that the greats had. You know, you had classical music. Usually, pieces had an intro, and then there was the idea that a small ensemble would play, and then the orchestra would join in, and then it went into the circle of fifths when it goes up the, you know, from the F to D to G to E sharp, E major, and and at one point, I used a device called pedal point, where that's the part that's over A minor, and so I knew about that concept. And I also learned about the idea that you could take the same notes and make it larger or smaller. So you had diminuto, which meant that you made the same musical phrase shorter or longer. Like, for example, if I went yam da 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 dum da 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 da, in other words, you could go dum la da 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 dum, so you could make a phrase twice as long or shorter than it was originally. So that was another device. And also, I did a part in C major because I knew that that was the relative major of A minor. And I kind of followed the sonata allegro form, and it goes back, you know, about 2/3 of the way through it, it goes back to the top to end it. And I was talking to Jeff about this. I decided to put a major chord on the very end, and I remember a phrase from music school called tierce de Picardy. And that was the idea that a lot of composers back then would end minor pieces with a major triad. And Jeff was telling me that this had religious implications, which I didn't know at, at the time, but maybe he'd be willing to expand on that. So, inside the composition, one of the things that I experimented with, I should say that a lot of my patterns were based on, I played 5-string banjo, and a lot of those eighth notes, triplets, and then 2/8 notes were banjo patterns. So I kind of went from, I incorporated banjo picking into it in many ways, and the I should say also originally it was about 6 minutes long, and so I back then you weren't going to get anything played on the radio that was over 3 minutes for sure. So I rather, you know, you spend a lot of time working a section out, and you thought, boy, I'd like to get more mileage out of that, but it turned out to be smart to cut it down to 3 minutes. So it made it a much tighter, better composition. So you just kind of went through, other than the beginning and the repeat at the end, you sort of were exploring new material all the time. And I often wondered, gosh, there's no comparison, but how would Mozart have written for the radio? And yeah, I bet he would have been great, no doubt about it. He was amazing. And let's see. Um, well, I don't know what else I could say about that except that it was. I will say this, that I wrote it as a solid guitar piece. In other words, it was meant to be played on solo guitar, but when it was arranged for my Warner Brothers record, Mike Post did a great arrangement of it. We added bass and drums, and that's what put it into the pop. I don't think it would have been as big a hit without the rock and roll aspect of drums and bass. Nelson Riddle was our music director on the Smothers Brothers show, and I used to talk to Nelson about, because he'd written all this great instrumental music, and I listened to it and I said the only thing it didn't have was rock and roll, bass and drums, and we used to talk about you know how the recording techniques and what the business and the listener was interested into. So anyway, there's I suppose the ultimate compliment was I went to the Chet Atkins Appreciation Society festival one year, and they gave me an award because they said classical gas had inspired so many people to pick up the guitar and wanted to learn to play fingerstyle guitar.
Yeah,
And
that's I can attest that over decades, classical gas was almost one of three pieces that every beginning guitarist asked if they could play: classical gas, Stairway to Heaven, and Romance d'Amour. Now, I wanted to ask Carlos about his.
wait,
Oh,
can
please.
I say something?
Yes.
As a comedy writer, I'm always looking for funny things, and one of the things that I was going to do, Stairway to Heaven, was that I was going to write a piece called Stairwell to Hell. And what it was is to take Stairway to Heaven and turn the music upside down and see if you could write a piece where the notes are upside down. And I got this idea from Mozart because he would write a piece of music that one person would be on one side of the music and the other person would be across the table. But when they played the same piece of music, it would be in harmony, which was very tricky. And so I thought, well, maybe Stairway to Hell would be a pretty interesting parody of Stairway to Heaven or Stairwell to Hell.
Wow. Amazing. So, Carlos, could you say a bit about how you approached arranging classical gas for two guitars? And I'm particularly interested that you transposed the key from its original of A minor, which has such convenient open A, E, and D strings for the harmonies, to G minor with your tuning to low C and low G for the two bass strings. But could you elaborate on how you went about this?
Yes, first of all, I admired the music very much, and then I tried to find a different kind of addressing for the piece and keeping all the original thoughts there as well. The key of G minor struck me immediately when I thought about setting up for two guitars, in which the top guitar would be basically the melodic line with occasional counterpoint too. But the second guitar, which is my part, giving a thicker bottom and thinking like C and G is really the cello. And then we have a tremendous way of expanding the piece sonorously as well, and maybe influences from some of my Brazilian background, in which I hear the seven-string guitar. Of course, I'm using the same number of strings, six, but just tuning low, C and G. But the blend of the two were the things that I really thought very much, in which gradually I immersed on the piece, and I heard many different beautiful versions of Mason himself and the different instrumentations. But I said, well, let's set for two guitars, and it really adds quite a bit of a sonority on the bottom, I think, the harmonic support of the piece and a certain form of legato as well. Yeah.
Very amazing. Yes. So I I find it really an absolutely wonderful, compelling arrangement. It seems to me that my experience is that the solo piece, classical gas, and then now in the duet version in G minor, it feels like a chamber orchestra, but two guitars with so many different timbres, accents, and also the way Carlos and the way you and Larry play it, the build to climactic points. Also, you have a little bit more of elaborated cadenza-like passages in some of the parallel parts of the original structure from Mason. So let's let's see now. Perhaps you and Larry can
Can I say something?
please go ahead, please.
I was going to say the great thing about Carlos's arranging is that there's some you're always the sum total of all of your artistic experiences, and his are so vast that he just brings a lot to the table. But he really is a master of understanding where in a piece of music he has the freedom or liberty to make it his own. Duke Ellington always said, whatever you do, you've got to also make it your own. And so he just knows in the piece where these places are where he can open it up, you might say, and make it his own. And, it's the intro and it's the leading into the pedal point section and naturally at the end. So that's what I found amazing was that he knew where the essence of the composition lay and stayed true to all of that, but he knew exactly where he could expound on aspects of it for his arrangement.
I that totally comes through to me just as a listener. So, Larry and Carlos, could you share a performance and playing of Classical Gas now? Would be super. Beautiful. fantastic.
That
What a,
that was the that was the live studio version uh, before 5 o'clock.
so, Larry, I have a question I wanted to ask you, and this applies to this piece, but the others and your other work with Carlos. Playing two guitars, which is my favorite guitar ensemble, is not four guitars or guitar orchestra. For that guitar orchestra, I need a serious medication to be able to recover from. But you, I just want to say that you play with complete at oneness with Carlos's part, and you have this ability to have the presence of your solo emphasized aspects and then to immediately switch into the supportive role seamlessly. It's just a wonderful, it's wonderful to hear you guys play together. And I just wanted to have you perhaps speak a bit about playing guitar with Carlos and how you have developed your sense of what that's all about.
Well, briefly, I started out when I was a kid playing in rock bands. And just a quick throwback to Mason and to yourself. Yes, classical gas was definitely one of the pieces you had to learn, or else you weren't worth your weight. So growing up, that was definitely one of the pieces along, along with Stairway to Heaven. But anyway, so I love the ensemble aspect of playing. So once I got into classical guitar, although I loved playing solo guitar, which is great stuff, I felt there were a ton of soloists out there already. And I loved ensemble. So the first CD I ever put out was a CD by the music of Ernesto Cordero, which Carlos coached me on that piece. And that's really how we met in 1990. The CD was released in 97, but we met around 96, 95.
96 maybe.
Yeah, in there. And I had Carlos in the room with me, and I was just blown away that I was even able. He was an idol of mine, still is an idol of mine. And I used to listen to all his arrangements, and I'd say, man, I would love to play with him, because I was a little jealous because Sharon Ispin got to record with him. And so as time went on, and Carlos and I developed our relationship, one day I asked him if I could perform, play a piece with him, never mind perform with him. And we did Luisa by Jobim, his Carlos's arrangement, and which we're going to record again. And playing with Carlos is like the ultimate duo partner, because he never makes a mistake. He always catches you if you're in a tight passage. Catch you. Like during the Sons de Cariolos, how many times live we did, don't worry, I'll catch you. And I just love playing. For me, playing with Carlos is it. I don't have to. There's a recent, it just came out, an interview of Carlos and I in Classical Guitar Magazine, and I mentioned that to Blair Jackson, that he's my ultimate duo partner. I just love playing with him. He has an open mind about things. He doesn't come from just a strict classical sense, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, where Carlos grew up, the Brazil popular music and classical music in Rio and Bahia and all those great musical cities in Sao Paulo and Brazil, they blurred those lines. It wasn't like here, where classical's classical, jazz is jazz, So that's the aspect I love. Go ahead, Jeff. What were you gonna say?
Yes, I was going to say about the word classical. Of course, we all know the classical period historically of Haydn and Mozart. But in reality, Haydn and Mozart, I would say in one sense, didn't write classical music. They wrote popular music for their day, for church, for parties, for everything you can imagine. And I kind of humorously, to me, I think today of classical music is what the culture keeps. It doesn't throw it away. So classical gas, that as I'm learning today, began with the Smothers Brothers and Mason working with them, has indeed become classical because the culture has kept it, and it continues to live and to live on, um, just as your arrangement for two guitars and his other music are showing us today.
Can I say something?
Yes.
One of the things that I used to say about classical gas is that it was a pop classical hybrid. And that's because it had the rock and roll bass and drums and the orchestra in it. But it was, since it was conceived as a complete piece for guitar, what Carlos and Larry have done is switched it to a classical pop hybrid. So in other words, they flipped it, and man, what a compliment that is, and it sure makes it unique. So I think that is the most interesting thing about them playing it as a two guitar thing. I have to say that the guitar is an amazing arrangement instrument. When you play a D chord, you couldn't write a better sounding, D on the bottom, and the way that the A and the D and the F sharp on top. So the guitar is a fantastic orchestrator in its own right, with all those simple chords, and of course you can get involved in more complex things, but the guitar is a great arranger on its own.
That's definitely shown here. So now I'd like to move forward to some looking at one of the other pieces from the CD, Saturday Night at the World. And Mason, this in the versions that I've heard is a beautiful song with you singing and the guitar accompaniment. And
Right.
can you give us some background into how this song came about and so forth?
Yes, I wrote it in 1965, and it was originally a song, and but I would frequently take songs I had written and turn them into instrumental pieces, and that happened in this case. And the concept of the song was that it's a romantic song, sort of in the Charles Aznavour idea of like a French folk song. And the first part of the melody is sort of you reflecting on the one you love. And then when it goes into the next section, you're sort of into, and it's sort of marked time, sort of straight ahead in tempo. But then when you get to the second part, it's like you're thinking about what it's going to be like when you finally get together. And so that's more fluid and more romantic and more dynamic tempo wise. So that was the idea, that it was a song with two tempos. And also the idea that as the song progresses, you're moving, a lot of it starts on the lower part of the guitar, but eventually you want to work your way up the neck and be playing in higher registers. And so that was the idea, that you would expand the dynamic range of it. And the two guitars really does that in a way that the solo guitar can, but not as effectively as the duet. So they really take it to another level as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff, may I
Yes,
just
yes.
add to what Mason is saying? It's so great that we have Mason here with us. I mean, he wrote all this great stuff, and I think this melody in particular, I mean, everything is great, but this it's a true duo, and I want to say something. I want to springboard off of what Mason said about the two guitar effect. When Carlos was brilliantly arranging the music of Jobim. Antonio Carlos Jobim said to him, "You know, Carlos, I don't think you're going to be able to arrange my work for two guitars, maybe four guitars." So Carlos said, "Nah," I could hear him. I could hear him saying, "Ah, don't worry." He came back a week later, or whatever it was, few days, with the folio set for two guitars, and Joe Beam couldn't get over it. The breadth and the total scope of the melody and the accompaniment. So Mason's right on target when he says that Carlos zoned in on the range of this piece for two guitars.
Can I say something?
Sure.
One of the interesting things, I have this quote from a painter named Carl Morris, and he says, "Music is the envy of all the arts because nobody asks what music means." So if you write a poem, they want to know what you mean. If you paint a picture, what does this mean? If you write a novel, what do you mean by this? But instrumental music, I mean, that's not true of a song because a song has words, so there's meaning implied, but instrumental music is the one place where the general public will accept an abstraction. And an abstraction is something that is what it is and is not sort of encumbered by meaning necessarily. You can kind of mess things up by even giving it a title. So you've got to watch out for that. And that's why a lot of the classical pieces don't have titles, you know. It'd be pretty hard to think of the Moonlight Sonata without thinking of moonlight, you know. But an awful lot of the pieces are just numbers, so they brilliantly escaped having their instrumental compositions be bogged down with meaning. So you're accepting something for what it is instead of what it means. And I think it's great that the general public will accept an abstraction in terms of music.
I think that there's another take on that, which is perhaps a bit metaphysical, but I believe that music goes immediately and directly to the heart and soul of any human being. It bypasses culture, prejudice, education, intellect, politics, and everything. And so the power of music, particularly as you were mentioning, Mason, even when there's no words, it's just a number or the word allegro or adagio, is something that communicates immediately, even over time. Something written 400 or 500 years ago for the vihuela in the 16th century, we can hear music of Luis de Narvaez and immediately be inspired and touched by it. So music has that quality of immediate communication. And I think that's part of the reason why what Mason says is absolutely spot on.
Can I say something else? One of the aspects about music is a perfect language, like electronics, because all over the world, every plug goes into the same hole all the time, and music is kind of like that. In other words, no matter what culture you're in, the music speaks to you from wherever it comes from. So I really think that music is a universal language. And my wife Karen was telling me that Plato thought the world of music. He thought it was one of the ultimate, I'd have to talk to her about it again. But anyway, he thought that music was the great language.
Yes, I'm remembering from my music schooling that the ancient Greeks thought that they placed music as the highest form of mathematics. And I'm glad, because the lower forms I was never good at, but the highest form maybe occasionally. Okay. So let's move ahead, and Carlos and Larry, could you play Saturday Night at the World with Carlos's arrangement for two guitars. Beautiful. Thank you guys so much. That's amazing.
Can I say something about the melody?
Yes, please.
One of the reasons that melody works is that because I'm a singer, and so when I write, I'm sort of incorporating the idea of writing a melody for the guitar that is a singer's melody to a certain degree, and so I think that's a part of that composition, is that it's a mix of not only guitar but also of singing, and I think that is a you can get involved in patterns and various things like that, but incorporating, there's no greater instrument in one sense than the human voice. And so when you incorporate that into your compositions, you've got something going for you.
In this in this arrangement, I was going to mention something that is my experience of listening to it, is that Carlos has taken the melody, and sometimes we hear it played by Larry, his guitar, Carlos plays it on his guitar. So we have the spatial differentiation, and also we're hearing it in different octaves with different articulations and string colors, so that the piece seems to go by in just the blink of an eye, because the color, the timbres, and the arrangement make it absolutely fascinating, even in the context of the arpeggiated basic accompaniment and the beautiful melody. So, Carlos, I wanted to ask you, how did you go about in this particular piece thinking about the arrangement for two guitars?
Yes, my first thought when I heard this beautiful melody, actually with some of Mason's own recordings, including with strings, I said, well, there is a kind of a quality, also in addition to the singing, beautiful part of this piece, but also that string quality, and then I felt also a little touch of South America, maybe northern South America somehow, in the second phrase. Then I kind of emulated the Venezuelan cuatro, doing the strumming with a miola type of a rhythm. But beyond that is a growth of sonorities, and like Mason explained too, the beautiful trip that the piece can take one. And I think also the range of the sonorous range of the guitar is really my biggest aim. And many times you can hear the melody in him and in minor too, sometimes in different octaves. And also, the one that doesn't need to play harder to play stronger, because the density of the texture is already creating the crescendo in the music.
If I may, that was well said. There's this melody that that Mason put in toward the end of the piece. Oh, that's so beautiful.
It's beautiful, yeah.
That's so beautiful, man.
And-
And the
and-
way Carlos underpins that with the harmonies.
I like to explore also for color quality. This
It's singing.
Actually, this was mentioned by the great Villa-Lobos and also Tom Jobim about the harmonic sound is the extension of the guitar. Instead of getting louder, it can get softer, actually, as it goes louder, but it has an amazing color quality as it goes higher with the harmonic sound. Or you can blend them in the more polyphonic texture, and very subtle too. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that this work that Carlos and all you guys have done is that you're carrying on the tradition that goes back at least to the Renaissance and before. And in the Renaissance, vocal pieces were often taken by the lutenists, and it was called intabulations. So they would take popular music and bring it to their to the lute. And the tradition of the troubadour, which Mason fits in, that is someone, a singer, a creator of music and songs and melodies. This goes back not just to the 60s, but essentially 1,000 years. And you guys are continuing one of the great traditions of music. This is how music has been born and reborn again through the generations. So I'm so excited and pleased to have shared this time with all of you. Awesome creativity, awesome music, and so forth. And I'm looking forward to uh, tracking and keeping track of uh, uh, both what Mason is doing now in his current work, as well as, of course, Carlos and Larry. I wanted to ask you, Carlos and Larry, do you have upcoming concerts that will be including some of this music that you've done on the CD?
We have.
Yes, we have had wonderful experiences, including very high level, diversified festivals in Germany recently, in which the reaction has been absolutely fantastic. And also, we have played throughout the US and many other places.
Dallas, Fort Worth, all in Texas, like Las Vegas,
In France, too.
France, and we play this every time we play Classical Gas and Saturday Night at the World. People just
Yeah, they love it.
they get crazy because they know Classical Gas, but when they hear it transferred and transformed, they just Germany. If you ever, I'm sure you've performed in Germany. Carlos and I performed there just about every year for the past 5-6 years, and the audience is very, very respectful of the music. Very respectful. They're silent. It's almost like
Yes.
as if you're playing to an empty house. After they hear Classical Gas, they go off.
Yeah.
They really they go crazy for that.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I don't know whether or not you want to have this be on the video or not, but one of the things about applause is that the people don't, I mean, they applaud what you're doing, but they're also applauding themselves for liking it. So you tend to think of applause as being for the artist only, but it's really for the fact that here's something they recognize. They've sort of placed a bet that this is going to be worth me coming here to hear it, and so they're applauding themselves for making a very good choice.
Yeah, they're excited about it. Thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you. Well put.
Very much so.
Well put.
Thank you very much.
So again,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. May I? Interject?
please.
Just springboard off that. Sunflower, another piece on the.
Love it.
Oh man, that
Yeah.
that is crazy. That piece with the percussion and the clarinet and it. There are so. I think the whole CD is great, and our engineer Leslie he did such a great job with that. But
Can I say something about Sunflower?
please, I love that piece.
I think of Sunflower as my Classical Gas gets the most attention, but I think Sunflower is one of my other better compositions. And back in the early 60s, I was experimenting with ways of creating things without me having to think of them. And the concept was I would take words and ascribe note values to the words, and they would give me intervals that I would never think of, the words would. And Sunflower is actually based on the word cantilever. So C was C and A was A, and and then once you got past G, then they became sharps. And so Sunflower is Cantillever. And of course, I had to write a middle section for it, and I had to put chords to it and whatnot. But that was a concept called chance composition, and it's sort of like rolling the dice. And so if you gave pitches to the numbers on the dice, then that's the next note you would play. So if you rolled a 3, if a 3 was a B or whatever it is, or an E, then that chance would give you the intervals of your melody. So, and I had a whole bunch of other stuff like that. I wrote poetry and using a weird concept too. I won't get into that, but but Sunflower was really in the realm of chance composition, and which is an art concept borrowed to put into the way you conceive of a melody for a piece of music.
Wonderful. Okay, so again, thank you all for coming together to share this music, the arrangements, and thank you to Mason, Carlos, and Larry. And we'll all follow up together again from Los Angeles, where I am, from Eugene, Oregon, and from New York City. It's a wonderful thing to have been able to get together with you guys.
How about a hand for our engineers?
Yes.
Yes,
Don and Leslie.
Right, and
absolutely.
Don Latarsky. Don Latarsky does all of my recording and mixing, and whether it's audio or video, he's an absolute master. And he teaches guitar at the University of Oregon and also teaches recording. So he's a double threat and a triple threat too, because he writes great guitar pieces as well. So I'm really surrounded by really great musicians and people with a lot of extra skills, and boy, I sure do appreciate it.
We're here in Leslie Bloom's Alchemy Post Sound Studio, where they do also Foley work for movies. And now every time I go watch a movie, I look to see if you guys, won some Emmys and they were nominated for an Oscar. So we're in good hands. Leslie does all our recording now, ever since the Mason CD. He did such a great job, and I'm glad that you gave it the stamp of approval because we did a great job on that. Are we doing Country Idyll, or are you doing that, the solo, or?
If you can, that would be fantastic. I'm up for it.
This is one of my very favorite pieces that I chose as solo for this project, called the Country Idyll, and has that real country going west. Maybe later Mason can talk about this country idyll here.
Can I say something?
Please go ahead.
I wrote Country Idyll sitting in front of my fireplace. I have a cabin up in the hills of Oak Ridge, Oregon, and I would sit in front of the fireplace, and staring into the fire was like a magical experience. And so I wrote this tune sitting in front of the fireplace, and somehow the images of getting lost in the flames and the magic of the guitar. It's like the guitar is like an Aladdin's lamp, the way you tune it up and rub those strings, and the genie of original music appears to take you on a magic carpet ride. So this tune happened in an intimate place. So, and I think that the way that Carlos plays it and his arrangement captures that beautifully. It's very intimate the way he performs it.
I'm now going to play Country Idyll.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That is such a treasure. Beautiful music arrangement. Can't get better than that. The only thing I'm hoping to hear from Carlos and Larry is that you're going to book some dates here in Los Angeles, because
Yes.
I can't wait for you to get out to this Southwest coast when you can. Again, thank you, everybody. We'll follow up, and good day to all.